If you want to give me their name, I can put it as a name instead of the phone number broadcasting.
I believe that is also Rex Atkinson.
Okay.
Looks like he may be in on online as well as call in.
Okay.
If you can shoot me an email, Rex, and confirm, that would be good.
Perfect. And I have the YouTube going, so we can start when you're ready.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get going. Time being 6:01, I call to order the City of Glenwood Springs Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. It is July the 28th, 2020. This is our regular meeting for July. And I just got a text from Ingrid. She wants to join in as well. So she's doing it. So while we're doing this, maybe we can start with a very slow roll call to give her a few minutes to, there she is. Okay, great. Catherine, please, could you take a roll call?
Sipperly? Here. Schaefer?
Here.
Grosscup?
Here.
Schachter?
Here.
Wissing?
Here.
Wusso?
Here.
Dem?
Here.
Kinkle?
Here. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Catherine. And for everybody watching this or people at home that would like to join in, the webinar ID for tonight is 825-0372-5341. That is if you're on a computer or a mobile device or a pad or something. If you want to call in, the phone number tonight is 1-669-900-6833. Again, webinar 825-0372-5341. Excellent. So without anything else up front, we'll jump right into our agenda here. And item number 3 on the agenda is the receipt of the minutes for the June 23rd meeting. And I'm entertaining a motion to receive those minutes.
I'd like to make one addition, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
I'd like Catherine, if you don't mind, on page 3, second paragraph. I'd like to reflect that I did comment that the opening up the Blake Gate did not seem consistent with the proposed strategy of the Transportation Commission.
Okay. I'm sorry, where were you going to add that?
Page 3 of the minutes, the second paragraph, where Commissioner Schachter asked if the local transportation plan had a draft. That was a draft of their strategic plan, and Terry confirmed that there was a draft to go to council. And I did comment my observation. It's only my observation was that their proposed strategic plan did not seem consistent with opening up the Blake Gate.
Okay, thank you for the addition. Entertaining a motion to receive those minutes.
So moved.
We have a motion.
Second.
And a second. And that came from George
and George.
Yes, okay, thank you guys. Any more discussion on the minutes? If not, I'll call for the question.
Wissing?
Do I approve or do I abstain because I wasn't there?
I think if you weren't there, you can abstain.
Okay, I abstain.
Thank you.
Wusso?
I'm sorry, what was that? Is that Wusso?
Wusso?
Yeah, I'll also recuse myself as I wasn't present.
Grosscup?
I didn't hear you, Catherine.
Hear me? Approve.
Thank you.
Doctor,
Approve.
Zipperly,
Approve.
Ben,
Approve.
Schaefer,
Approve.
I think we're through. Okay, excellent. Before we jump into this, I also would like to seat our alternate commissioner tonight, Dean Kinkle. If I could get a motion to have him seated, that'd be great.
Wait, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Does that allow us, are we allowed to seat 8 commissioners, Mr. Chairman?
Oh,
I wasn't sure if I was needed. Her Gretchen's email just said reply if you can't make it, so I could make it. So I figured I'd sign on. So to help if need be.
that is fantastic. Thank you, Dean. Yes.
This is Gretchen, sorry. Dean's presence would be needed at the workshop. So if he could just hang out for Trent's regular agenda item, then we'd like him to be available to comment on the workshop items.
Great.
Okay, that'd be fantastic. Is that going to work for you, Dean? You're on mute.
You're muted.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. What I might do with that being the case is enjoy the workshop from the comfort of my home. So if it's okay with everyone, I'll sign out and then sign back in about 20 minutes.
Sounds great.
All right.
We'll see you then. Thank you. Okay, thanks for counting, Sumner. Yeah, to me it was just, okay, commissioners are here, let's play. So great.
Warm bodies are good.
That's right. Excellent. So moving on the agenda. Oh no, I have to item number 4, which are comments from citizens appearing for items that are not on the agenda. And I don't think I see anybody. Trent, are those your people on the attendee list?
Yes, except for Matt Ross.
Okay.
So I don't know if.
Okay,
if
Matt, raise your hand if you're here for an item that is not on the agenda. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to our first new item for tonight. It is, let's see, planning item 13-20, consideration of a special use permit for the construction of a 654 square foot wireless communication base station facility related to an underground fiber optic network. And I think Trent's gonna present. So Trent, please.
Yes, I am. Good evening, Chair, Planning and Zoning Commissioners. Trent Hyatt with the Community Development Department, here to present this item this evening, and I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see a short PowerPoint that I prepared. Everyone see that okay?
It's a little smaller than usual.
Okay, hold on 1 second here. Well, now.
Still about the same unless I'm doing something wrong.
Is that better? No?
That's better.
Okay, good. I think it's maybe just a little slow this evening, but this is an application for a base station not in the right of way from Zayo Group, with 5-9 Design Group being the main applicant that I've been dealing with so far. But So you can see this property is zoned CO Commercial District, as are properties to the north, east, and south. You can see the property there. Yeah, sorry guys, it's definitely a little lag tonight. Anyhow, it's in a zone and mix of uses, commercial uses, as well as Interstate 70 there to the south. The applicant proposes a 653 square foot, 12-foot tall base station for the purposes of supporting an underground fiber optics network. Section 70-2030E, Table 30.1 identifies this use as a special use in the CO zone district. And that refers mainly to wireless communication facilities. And this seemed to be the best place for this use, even though it's not directly related to wireless communications. It does have some of the same type of equipment. But you can see there a northeast aerial view of the project site, which is mostly vacant. It has been used for some vehicle storage in the past, construction material storage, and then here is a view of the same site from Interstate 70. I will note that it is elevated, or it is below grade of the interstate by, approximately 6 or 7 feet or so. So this would be looking down into the site. The general special use review criteria don't apply to this. When we're dealing with wireless communication facilities, we have specific standards outlined in 70-30-30G6A to address those issues, and it mainly deals with compatibility with the existing environment. And in this case, the specific wireless communication facility standards try to address the camouflaging of the site, the screening and buffering, lighting, accessory equipment, and try to make sure that those do their best to avoid the natural environment. So I can see a couple pictures here right outside of the screen. That would be actual place on the site, which is brown color, so you can see the surroundings there.
We seem to have some sort of an audio issue.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's nope. It was better.
Yeah, sorry. Basically, to show you what the site and see the applicant
At this point, you're cutting in and out.
I'll just see if it's a little bit better as I go, as well as the color of the fence. I've worked with the applicant a little bit. That's going to be a color to match the existing fence that's adjacent to the site, the hotel there to the south. Other criteria deal with things that are not necessarily applicable to this application in terms of the protrusion of various antennas, wall-mounted communication facilities above the roof line, as well as anything that's roof mounted. The only thing that's going to protrude from this building is going to be the fiber optic entry and exit points, as well as the cooling units by only about 2.5 feet. So no issues there. We did receive a few comments on this application from the Engineering and Public Works Department that have been addressed to date. Section 70-60-30G1 allows you to, not to recommend to City Council, but to approve approval conditions or deny this application or continue it for additional info. Staff recommends approval of conditions of action. 6. Just exit out of this. Sure.
You were breaking up at the end a little bit, but I assume you said you're going to exit out of your screen, so maybe your audio will work a little better. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I do believe if I just stop sharing my screen, it'll be a little bit more consistent. It was earlier, so I apologize for.
No worries. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Trent. Any questions to staff at this point? And let's see, we'll start with Commissioner Shaver, please.
Where would the Trent, where would the screening be that you're recommending, the landscape screening?
They have some landscaping proposed along the northeast portion of the site. I would prefer that there be additional landscaping to the north as well as adjacent to Interstate 70. I've had some discussions with the applicant and they're willing to work on that with us.
Not necessary on the south?
Well, along the south side, there's pretty much a fence the entire length of the property adjacent to the hotel site. So I just don't know if it would do too much or have too much benefit there.
Okay. The only other question that came to mind, I understand there's a generator there in case power is lost. What would be the noise impact from that to say the hotel? Or
if our generator at City Hall gives us any indication that when they are running, it is pretty loud. Again, that is only an emergency backup situation, I assume that will be somewhat buffered by the existing fences there.
Mm-hmm. It's probably not as large a generator. I would assume that the power requirements probably doesn't match what the City Hall does, I would assume.
Likely not, but I imagine that Rex, the applicant, can give you some additional details on that.
Are there fiber optic cables in that area now?
Yeah, there are. Actually, there is a line that runs along Interstate 70 all the way out to Utah. I think that runs pretty much from Denver west.
And would you have had this problem had we had fiber optics running tonight with your audio? That's all I have, Trent. Thank you.
I think the city works with Zayo and I'm on Comcast, so maybe not.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioner Schachter, please.
Two quick ones, Trent. The owner of the property, is that the hot spring? Who's Glenwood Springs Lodging LLC? Do we know?
That's the group that owns actually the La Quinta to the south, but
right.
The Hot Springs does on the property to the north, but not this property.
And the other question, this is just fiber optics. This has nothing to do with the raging controversy over 5G.
Only fiber optics.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Zipperly, please.
Thanks. My couple of questions are, one, I saw declared on the drawings that there's not currently an access easement through the adjacent hotel property. That might be better a question to direct to the owners, but I'm wondering if they have an access agreement in the works with the adjacent property. And my second question is regarding the image of the evergreen in the packet. I do suppose it would be more effective at screening if the evergreen trees would have branches in the lower section as opposed to the one that is shown in the illustration.
Yeah, Carolyn, and I imagine that they're probably willing to discuss specific species with us on the plants. I know that, generally we would have a mix of evergreens and deciduous trees. However, in this circumstance, we want to be a little sensitive to the fact that we're not running major utilities to this project, so irrigation will not be available. But I'm certainly willing to work with the applicant to maybe include some additional maybe low growth shrubs that would complement that. In regards to the access easement, I think that's one of the issues we identified for the applicant, but the owner of the property to the south that provides access to this is the same as this property, so the access easement shouldn't be too much of an issue to obtain. But we do want to have that in case it were ever divided, sold separately, some issue came up.
Great, thank you. Any additional questions? Commissioner Groscup, please.
Thank you, Trent. Can you just give me sort of a big picture? This building supports fiber optic, not just here locally, but all the way out to Utah. So is there something about why they picked Glenwood, or I just don't, just give me a better understanding overall. Thank you.
Yeah, the technology associated with it is not something that I'm necessarily up to date on, so I'm sure the applicant can help out there.
And then, like, in terms of do we have other zoning in town where this could have been proposed? I mean, I think this is a logical site, but just curious.
For these type of base stations or wireless communication facilities that are not in the right of way, so outside of the right of way, are allowed via special use in most of the commercial zone districts.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions to staff? No, we'll see none. Thank you, Trent. Let's get our attendees in here. And
Alyssa, you may want to promote the phone number starting with area code 812. I'm not sure which one Rex has on audio.
okay, great. Please state your name and address for the record.
Yes, it's Rex Atkinson, and address is 8730 Powderhorn Way, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46256.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm with 59 Design. We are architects and engineers. We do architects, engineering, site development for the Zayo Group, which does run fiber optics all over the country and are based out of Denver. And so the way, to answer the question for the fiber optics, the way fiber optic works is it runs light through filament, and after 50 or 60 miles, that light signal needs to be regenerated to keep at optimal speed. So Glenwood happens to be one of the buildings that falls in that distance. There's also one in Avon and Silver Plume and Grand Junction, and then it goes on to Utah, and there's 4 or 5 others in Utah as well. So it's a way to move the information along the line. Otherwise, everything Trent said was correct. There's an existing plastic stone fence along the La Quinta, and so we're just matching that to surround our building, and I'd be willing to put a little more landscape in if required. The way I did it now is I just put some landscaping kind of break up the facade of the fence along the east side, and it was kind of a tight site, so I didn't have a lot of landscaping. I was hoping the fence would screen it, but yeah, I'm definitely willing to make that to make some adjustments, and definitely open for whatever type of low water need planting you would recommend. But yeah, otherwise the site is accessed off the existing parking lot from La Quinta, and it's kind of pushed into the corner of the site to maximize how close it was to the fiber in the right of way, and also kind of leave the most open space as possible to the existing site.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Rex. Any questions?
You're welcome.
Applicant at this point? I see none. No questions. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else here that would like to present part of this application? Or is it just Rex? I think it's just Rex. Is that correct, Trent?
Yes, as presenters, unless Mr. Ross is here to speak in the public hearing portion.
Okay, great. Thank you, Trent. Opening the, if I don't see any more questions, we'll open the public portion for this hearing. Is anybody here to comment on this application? Please raise your hand. And I see none. So I will close the public portion for this item for tonight, and I'll bring it back to the commission for a motion to proceed. I'm entertaining a motion in planning item 13-20, consideration of a special use permit for the construction of a 654 square foot wireless communication base station facility.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion regarding planning item 13-20 with the special use permit for a base station not in the right of way related to underground fiber optics in this commercial CO district. I would recommend that we approve the special use permit with the findings and conditions on page 6 of the staff report, with the additional, looks like we may need an additional condition that that there be additional fence screening. And George, help me out. Which sides were in need of additional screening?
Well, the side that wasn't mentioned was the south, and that was, I think there's a fence there though, right? If I'm not, Trent's
So it's
not.
already screened? Okay.
I think it's screened with a fence. I just was curious about, where the planting. And I, quite honestly, without irrigation, I'm really concerned. Even plants that will grow in our environment often need irrigation just to get them established. I'd hate to see a bunch of dead sticks out there. That's worse than not
never
having
mind.
a ball.
Then I'd make the motion as recommended on page 6, and I would, with the assumption, Trent, that that the condition 6, you would work with the applicant to see if there's any additional, as Commissioner Sipperly said, and addressing George's concerns, that is there any reasonable additional shrubbery that could be done? And I think that's already covered in condition 6. That would be my motion to approve as stated on page 6.
I'll second that.
Okay, excellent. Motion and a second to approve. Any discussion? Everybody clear on the screening and all that good stuff? So, okay, if I see no more discussion, I'll call for the question.
Doctor?
Was that me? Aye. Yes.
Russo?
I will approve.
Roscoe?
Approve.
Schaefer?
Approve.
Dem?
Approve.
Wissing?
Approve.
Okay, motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Catherine. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Rex, for calling in. Thanks, Trent, for presenting. That was easy. Looks like we're moving into workshop mode.
Dean's here. That's good.
Is Dean back? That was my next question.
I see him on the screen.
You do?
I did.
Hi.
Yeah, there he is.
I'm back.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, so let's move into, I guess, number 6 in the agenda, item A, which is a discussion on amending regulations related to medical marijuana business, retail marijuana business, and marijuana cultivation. And Trent again. Is that correct?
I think Gretchen was gonna kick this one off, but I'm certainly here for the discussion and have some maps that may aid in the discussion as we go through.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Gretchen, please.
So we recently heard from City Council that they we're interested in the commission taking a look at the existing marijuana regulations and possibly adopting some either a cap on the number of marijuana establishments in the city or somehow otherwise limiting the number. And so you all are the first step in that process. And so this tonight is just a general discussion of how you think that limiting marijuana uses in town, how you think we should do that. And then the intent would be to continue the discussion to the August meeting and perhaps bring back some actual regulations for you all to consider. So with that, Trent, if you don't mind sharing your screen and showing the map of the number of establishments that we have in town.
Sure will. Hopefully it doesn't limit our my ability here, but I did want to go over that with you.
Trent, I'm following along on my laptop. Are you showing like the school marijuana map? Just so I can maybe have a bigger version.
Yeah, that's what I'm about to show
thanks.
to you.
That's what I'm doing too. I'm looking at it on my screen in case we have some need
Yes.
for optics.
That would definitely benefit. But you know, I just wanted to point out that we currently have 9 approved marijuana related businesses, whether they're retail marijuana establishments or medical marijuana businesses. You know, a lot of those are one and the same these days. 9 approved, 7 total open. And one that is actually, if you can see my cursor here, up the upper left-hand corner, that is proposed. This would be at the same location as the Native Roots Gas and Grass that you heard previously, but has since been expired. We have a new applicant that's interested in that location, and really it would be a relocation of Martin's Recreational, which is on West 6th Street and the North Landing area of town. So they're proposing to be relocated to West Glenwood, as the pool has purchased that property and does not plan to renew their lease. Now, the question remains is whether or how long the special use permit would be applicable in the Martin's location if it were not being operated. So, you know, is it a similar 3-year invested right period for that one? But what I did do, and you know, I don't know that this is necessarily the best option for you all. It's certainly one that you could discuss maybe in conjunction with the cap if that's the way that you want to go. But you could consider increasing the setbacks or the buffers associated with the current regulations, and maybe that accompanies a maximum cap number, whatever that ends up being. But what I did is just showing some increased buffers at 1.5 times the current rate for schools, 750 feet, and then twice the rate at 1,000 feet. I did the same thing for marijuana, 1.5 times the 900-foot buffer would be 1,350 feet, as well as 1,800 feet. The one thing that I just do want to mention is that with these buffers, you know, every time that we think that we have kind of built out or to our maximum number of marijuana related businesses, it seems that, you know, someone finds a location that is available, similar to the Kind Castle that was at 2114 Grand Avenue, kind of snuck in this area here. You know, the issue also is that the locations of these businesses do change. The locations of schools sometimes also change. So again, just to reiterate, you know, the buffers may be a tool in terms of how you might want to regulate this.
Hey, Trent, a quick question about your map. And it's a tad bit small on my screen, but I see, is the light blue around the green, would that be the increased? So basically the map we have in our packet with the green, just the green circles or the green boundaries, that's the current, that's where we are currently.
I'm gonna zoom in here for you to show you that a little
Okay.
bit. So I've added different colors. So it's different colors for different buffers. Here you'll see this is a marijuana related business, the green solution. The green is the existing buffer.
Okay.
The blue would be 1.5 times at the 1350, and then the yellow in this circumstance would be 1,800 feet. And I'm happy to zoom in or out on any of these locations that might help you guys take a look at this. For schools, that's where you're looking at 500 feet and an increase of 750 on this map. And then I have another one that shows, an increase of the max 1,000 feet.
Okay. So I guess my point was, if I'm looking at the map that I have in my packet, that is what we currently have. Because I don't see your increased buffers in that.
Yeah. So this would be similar to the current map that you have. The only difference is that I have updated this a little bit, just to show some of the locations, such as the dispensary. You may have remembered this one as the station. That is now being proposed as the dispensary at 172 West 6th Street, approved not open. As well as the other approved not open would be the stash, which is at the Glenwood Commercial Center.
Okay, so the one we most recently talked about was, where was that again? On 20th, 19th Street area?
Yeah, so that was right in this area here. You can see these properties here
Okay.
are not in the current yellow buffer. And also not subject to a 900-foot buffer from an existing shop. So, there are some locations, some commercial locations, all that depends on vacancy, the ability of the property owner. But you can see that, if we look at a similar location on this map, Marco, you can see where some changes to the buffers would kind of close up some of those gaps.
And just out of curiosity, and sorry, I'm starting out here, but have you actually gone through our commercial locations to see, with the current regulations, how many more could fit?
I think that honestly, the only option for these uses, again, these are only allowed in commercial districts. So, a lot of the properties that you'll see here, these are actually residentially zoned properties. The only areas with our current, and we'll go back to that current map, that could be subject to this would be now, Glenwood Meadows, but we've identified an issue with Glenwood Meadows that prevents the use there due to the fact that it's not an identified use in the Glenwood Meadows annexation and development plan. So it's limited in that area, but the area of 21st and this, so this would be Grand Avenue coming down here, as well as the area between, approximately, north and south of 27th Street. There would be opportunity for this use there along Grand Avenue. And that would be pretty much it. All of the areas you see here, Marco, are all residentially zoned properties.
Right. And over in West Glenwood as well, right? We're from what I can tell, we're full over there.
Yeah, that would be with the addition or relocation of Martin's to the 23 Melray, which was a previously approved site. You could locate one there. Now,
that's about it.
Yeah, you know, if you're looking at the map here now where my cursor is, I mean, you know, again, availability, vacancy, and the property owners allowing that use, you know, you could see some maybe in the Gilstrap area as well as very, very west Glenwood Mall area
Okay,
on some of those out parcels only.
okay.
So to answer your question, yes, our regulations would allow additional shops. That's why I think that, you know, if we're really feeling that we're at the point of saturation with this use, then, you know, we need to use the buffers maybe as a tool in conjunction with something else.
Sure. I get it. I understand. Okay, well, thanks for pointing that out. Thanks, Trent. Sumner, go ahead.
Two questions. One is more an issue of our role, and maybe Gretchen can clarify, or Jen. Did the city council specifically say they want to limit the number of marijuana shops?
Sumner, this is Gretchen. I think that the direction from city council was to consider regulations that would limit the number of marijuana establishments in the community.
And Gretchen, can you infer or be more explicitly why? I mean, is there intent to limit it? And my concern is kind of the cart and the horse. Should we be doing this if council's intent is not to limit specifically? If their intent is not to, because they speak for the city, if their intent is to limit any future growth or the number of marijuana shops, then I see that as our role. If right now they're on a fishing expedition, I'm a little reluctant saying, no, we need specific direction from you, not just to examine options, but yes, we want to limit. Otherwise, we're being asked to comment on policy where there's no policy. And that's my concern. And maybe you or Jen can comment on that.
Right, and I think I want Jen to clarify too, but I think that the direction was that I mean, at least what I heard is that they are interested in limiting the number of additional marijuana shops now, and that's all the uses. So I'm just saying marijuana blanket, that includes cultivation, medical, and retail.
Okay.
But how you do that is the question. So the question is, do you set a specific cap?
Got it. All right. Then that makes sense. If that's a policy they want to pursue, then our role does make sense. And then if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I have a question then of Trent. Maybe you can put the map up, but it was a little hard to tell, Trent. If we expanded those buffers to whatever the maximum of your illustration, how much room is left for expansion, if any? Both the school and the marijuana distance. If we expanded them, can we basically eliminate any future growth?
I think you could, Sumner, but again, just to reiterate, you know, that's based on current locations of schools and current locations of,
Right.
of marijuana related businesses. So those do change, but yes, and I think the doubling of the buffers, you know, illustrates that can be achieved. And that's what you'll see here in this map.
Because buffers was one thing that made sense. I guess the third question would be, what, if any, legal obstacles would the city face in the case now of expanding buffers and or pairing that with a limit to the number of shops?
Anna may want to jump in on that, but you know,
Yeah,
the referendum that allowed this use gives municipalities and local governments a lot of leeway in regulating this use to however we want to. Yeah, I mean, there would be the possibility that you could make some of the existing locations maybe legal non-conforming, but you know that, you know, as long as they are in operation of that use, that wouldn't, you know, be an issue for them.
It would only be if it changed ownership or if they wanted to relocate or close down. Is that? Yeah.
Correct.
That's all I have right now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumner. Hey, Sorry, guys, I don't mean to jump in, but I'm just thinking of something quick. Trent, if Martin moves to native roots, that would potentially open up a whole downtown, right? A buffer to be taken.
Yeah, I think it potentially would, but there would be some time associated with that. I mean, I think
Because
if the
the ownership.
correct, I wouldn't be concerned about that location because the ownership has changed, and I mean, the pool's not interested in that use, but it would open up that area of North Glenwood to allow for it at a different location. Correct.
At some point, right? Okay, thank you. Commissioner Grosskreutz, please.
Okay, thank you. Just one clarifying for you, Trent. On the map, I guess I'm looking at the one on my computer. When the 900-foot buffers, when you have overlapping circles, how does the measurement of that 900 work currently, foot buffer?
It works from the subject property line. So if the actual property would have to overlap a buffer. So it's not necessarily the buffers overlapping each other. The buffers overlapping each other would prevent, new uses within that area. But, if your new location would have to be outside of the buffer, but the buffers overlapping themselves don't necessarily have any connection. As much as it just kind of creates a a puzzle or overlay of the city where these regulations are applicable or are limiting.
So essentially you would, this would be the parcel and then the most adjacent line of that parcel, and here's a next proposed marijuana business, whatever type, and then you would calculate whether or not it was over 900 feet, or if under, then it would be an allowed location. Is that kind of the right understanding?
Yeah, I mean, let's just use this. Well, I don't know if you're looking back at my screen or not, but as an example, this is a buffer for an existing use. I believe that's Green Dragon on Devereaux Road. You can see that this parcel is within that buffer. So this property owner would be limited in allowing that use there. It's in Glenwood Meadows, so they'd be restricted for other reasons, but just as an example. So, if a business wanted to come in where, the current Courtyard Marriott is right here, then that would be an option.
And then the next question I had is, I remember, and it's many years ago, an applicant telling us in their proposal that we were an anomaly community in allowing less than 1,000 feet from schools. Have you got any information about if that's an accurate statement, or what? At some point we must have done some research, but that might have been pretty old now. So I guess that would be something I would be curious about, is even along, since this has matured as an industry somewhat, where did a lot of communities land on that school buffer? My understanding was 500 was pretty, extreme on one side. Do you know?
And I do not know, Catherine. I'm sorry. I don't know. Where we compare to other communities with the school issue specifically. Maybe
So
Gretchen does.
Oh, well, if not, could we request that when we got to a place where we were talking about ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're giving us some direction tonight, we could bring that to you for sure.
Well, that's something I would be interested in as just a member of the commission. And then I think the last conversation I would put forward is kind of as this, as we've sort of seen what this is like, and seen it grow in all sorts of communities, and you have different communities embracing this industry in different ways. I like the buffer idea, and some look at that, but maybe also an overall cap, because I just feel like the more you look at that map and little details, so at some point, maybe sort of like a cap at some high end. So that was something I was thinking about.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. And Commissioner Wusso, please.
Okay, so a good segue. I'll follow up with Commissioner Grosskopf in saying that I think a concurrent revision that had a cap, but then in addition had some, an expanded buffer with that, dialogue. I think when we did the short-term rental revision to the code, we had a really excellent synopsis from Hannah that told us what other communities were doing, what was working, what wasn't. If we could have something like that, I think it would be a really helpful tool. So I'm in total agreement that if you guys could start working on that, that would be awesome. Other questions I had is just how are, I understand that a special use permit expires with like a short-term rental upon change of ownership. And in addition to this, but what happens when it's sold? So if Green Dragon takes over Kind Castle or whatever the case, how does that special use permit transfer when ownership transfers?
That's a very good question, Ingrid, in that, in the case of the dispensary, which was the station, generally special use permits transfer with the transfer of real property.
Mhm.
So in that case, it did transfer to the new owner, and there were not significant changes in their proposal that staff felt like we needed to bring it back to you for an amendment. But that's another thing to possibly consider, that, if properties are transferred, then maybe they are required to apply for a special use permit.
Yeah, my concern, and the reason I bring it up is because I feel as though for the sake of a fair market and our regulations not preventing other business owners to have an opportunity, I feel like we could very easily have a monopoly if we don't take that into consideration on how that transfers. So, if we can have our expanded area and people can be creative, but if a business does just choose to either sell or go out of business, I think it's appropriate to have a new opportunity for others to apply for that. I know that I'm going to use the example that in Montana, liquor licenses are held and sold, and they sell for a significant amount of money because there's only a limited amount of money or a limited amount of liquor licenses available. And it becomes a very competitive environment that I'm not a huge fan of how it's structured. So I'll just apply that and say, let's include that in our dialogue.
I heard that specific issue in other communities in Colorado, where people were selling the permits.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, wait, I think I had one more. I'm not done yet. Hold on. Hold on. Let's see. Caps. I had that. And then also, when and if we do this, if one location already has a special use permit but has not chosen, I know that there's the only one that's existing now has expired. But if we're in transition, how is that application if it's been approved, but they have not started the business or something like that? What is like the concept of grandfathered in? How long do they have a period to be able to open the business if indeed we change this amendment in the code?
Generally, any complete application would have its standing, moving forward while we're making revisions to the code.
And how long does that, like 1 year or how long?
Oh, great question. I mean, usually it would be processing the application, however long that takes. But then once it was approved, the code states, there's a 3-year vesting period. So ultimately you'd have 3 years if it was approved within, the time.
3 years. Okay. Okay. And that was my last question. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Shaver.
One of my thoughts in relation to what Ingrid mentioned about change of ownership, the other thing that can happen over time is, new schools, relocation of schools, that sort of thing. So it would seem that that would make sense to have an additional review or a new special use permit application requirement, because other things change as time goes on. So I think that might be a good idea. The capping the number, which if we do cap the number, that also would take away that potential problem that Ingrid mentioned about the liquor licenses in Montana and the value of those. If we require that process to be made, which I tend to agree is sort of a monopoly game of sorts, I guess, when you put a value on that and you're just, kind of speculating on the value of the permit per se. I'm curious about native roots, is that what it's called? And it appears to be, was that already within 500 feet of the Montessori and the middle school when it was approved?
No, it was about 40 feet greater than 500.
Barely over. Yeah.
We required them to provide us with a survey to confirm that because we were concerned.
And now Martin's can take over that location? Is that what we're saying?
Not in this circumstance. I mean, they plan to purchase that property, but they are required to reapply because that special use permit has expired.
So they're purchasing the real property. Martin's is.
I believe they're on a contract.
Well,
yes,
okay.
Yes,
It is
some
intended to
group.
be a
I don't know
transfer.
if it's, yeah, correct.
Transfer of real property. I want to talk about the philosophy of proximity to schools. I mean, with two pretty good sized rivers running through town, I mean, is the thinking that we don't want students to see it, don't want students to be near the people that are clientele of these businesses? The rivers, the Colorado River is quite a barrier between where Green Dragon is and where the middle school is, for instance. And I understand that right now they're outside of those boundaries, but I mean, it's almost like another town for that matter, as far as that facility being in proximity to the school. If you see, what can we talk about that philosophy of what the reasons for the separation are?
Sure. I mean, I think similar to alcohol sales, it's the fear of the potential influence for, those young adults and children. You hear the applicants mention that, children are not even allowed, anyone under 21 is not even allowed to enter one of these facilities, whereas, children can go into liquor stores with their parents. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the interaction of them with, these properties and the potential influence.
Mm-hmm. So whether it's line of sight or, sort of practical proximity, you see what I'm getting at. The mapping is a little deceiving, I think, because of the reality of the kind of exposure you get because of the topography.
Right.
Correct.
But one thing we've heard a lot from the public And it's something that, the council's decision on, obviously, but is that we already have enough dispensaries in our town. Just the gross number is a common theme that I've heard when we've had some of these applications come forward.
Yeah,
what kind of potential problem is there to just setting a cap, or is there one?
I don't think there is one. I mean, and I think it's obviously great, as either Catherine or Ingrid pointed out, that, it's nice to be able to, let's see what some of the surrounding communities are doing. But at the end of the day, it's up to us. It's our town. We get to regulate this use how we see fit. But there's certainly no issues with the cap. Other communities are doing that already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Trent.
Thank you, George. Commissioner Zipperly.
Thanks. I have a few questions here. In looking at the map of the existing buffers and setbacks, it really seems as though we have only 3 locations left in the entire city that could be potential marijuana stores. Am I seeing that right?
Correct. I think you're right, Carolyn. Three various areas. Exactly where that lands depends on where the application is submitted for.
And so we currently have 9 approvals that would allow for 3 additional for a number of 12. Does the city regulate the quantity of any other businesses like gas stations or grocery stores, or is this the only business that the city regulates?
Catherine Fletcher's on the call here today. I don't know if liquor, licenses are regulated in terms of a number. I'm just familiar with the distance requirements, but in terms of other uses, no.
Okay. So if Martin's does go through and purchase this West Glenwood property where Native Roots was, and we go change the rules, they might have a property there that they can no longer develop. That could happen, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, potentially that could, if they submitted an application, it were approved, and the regulations changed and made that a legal non-conforming use, yes, that could limit the redevelopment of that site.
I think, though, this is Gretchen, sorry. I think that if Martin submitted an application, it is considered, and then we were in the process also then of changing the regulations. Martin's came in with an application prior to the change in the code going into effect. They would be allowed to have, and if you all approved it, they would be allowed to have their facility at the old Shell station.
Right. It would be whatever code they were under when they applied.
Right.
So someone should quickly tell Martin's that they better get on with it.
Well, to be clear, I think, Trent, and clarify this for me, is that Martin's intends to submit an application sooner than later.
Yes, they've already submitted and had a pre-application conference with the city. They just submitted an official.
Okay, so I think that, and Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, but they are, for lack of a better word, in the hopper. So they wouldn't be impacted by whatever regulations that we put into effect.
My question would be, is that the submittal of a full application or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because we don't have a time limit on when somebody has to, I mean, right now, they could have a pre-application and conference and go away for 2 years and still, yeah, that's a good question.
But
So
so Carolyn's particular question is if they had submitted and then the rules changed, then they would be under whatever they submitted under.
right, I was not aware that they'd already entered into the pre-application conferences. So if that sort of gets them in the door, I think that alleviates some concern of mine on their part. I do have one other question, and this is about how we were, Commissioner Shaver was mentioning that schools do move around. So if one of the schools needed to or wanted to relocate, are they now limited by the 900-foot buffer around weed stores? Seems like they should not be allowed to relocate near the weed store. Is that how this works?
No, they could move wherever they wanted to, and they could potentially make an existing store a legal non-conforming use. They're not restricted to the same requirement that the marijuana use is.
So the marijuana use could continue to operate within the buffer zone of the school if the school moves there after.
Yes, as long as they were in operation and in good standing.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Schachter.
Well, I don't want to discount what we're doing here, but it sounds like we're ready. We're being asked almost theoretically. It sounds like the commissioners have already covered all the bases. And it sounds like, again, if council is committed to limiting the number of marijuana shops, then we get that commitment from them. And do they want us to flesh out the combination of absolute number and increased boundaries and issues of non-conforming, or do they want staff to? But I think it's already time to throw it back to them, quite frankly, without doing excessive staff homework other than what was requested. That would help the city and us, should it be back on our plate, to look at what other communities, what combination of factors they've used. But I would say we're ready to throw it back to them. If you guys, as a matter of policy, want to limit and or reduce the future number of marijuana shops, then we know there are at least 3 ways to do that. And if you want us to do it in conjunction with staff, when you tell us yes, we'll go ahead and do it. If you don't tell us yes, we don't need to spend any more time on this.
What's your 3 ways?
Well, one would be limiting the absolute number. Second would be increasing the school zones. The third would be increasing the distance between the shop zones. And then you'd probably have to deal with some non-conforming use and transfer of ownership if you chose to. I haven't heard anything else at this point.
So Sumner, I think that the city council is interested in the near term having a work session with P&Z. So we can have that as one of the topics if that's of interest. I think we can, in the meanwhile, pull together some information. I do know that if we're looking for something similar to what Hannah pulled together for vacation rentals, then we're talking about several months, because
Right.
we worked on all Hannah makes it look easy, but it was months and months of work to get ready for that conversation.
Oh, Jen, I agree. And I'm not sure this is coming from us. I think I'm throwing it back to council. How important is it? How high a priority? If they wanted to cut out a lot of that time, they would just say, well, okay, we want to limit them to the existing number. Let's rewrite the code. That would be a quicker process than doing a bunch of research and comparison. So again, I'm not asking you or anybody else or us to do all the work until council directs.
And I think, to be fair, because the new code requirement requires a public hearing before Planning and Zoning Commission, I think that they're kind of looking for the process to start, but we can certainly confirm and potentially at that joint work session.
Yeah. I think I think between my fellow commissioners and staff, we've identified the tools. Tell us if you want us to use them.
Well, I have to say, I don't think I'm ready to just throw it back.
Okay.
I
What else
think they well, don't make me give you a list. I think we should at least do a little more. I think yes, we've heard the commission, and yes, we have 3 approaches. Maybe there is some other angle we could do. I have to be, I have to refer back to the last one we looked at, and my biggest hangup was that there was a mixed use building. It had more than just commercial use in it. There was residential units in it, and that bothered me. And to be honest, maybe instead of caps or larger buffers, maybe the actual use in the building, maybe they have to be freestanding. Maybe they have to be, unless you're in the GID, which makes it, the downtown core, which makes it very, very almost impossible. But maybe that's something else to look at, instead of just saying, all right, let's increase the buffer, let's shut everything down. That's what I hear. I'm not sure I'm ready to shut it all down. I know we have 11 licenses. We also have 11,000 people, including West Glenwood on the Hill. So 1,000 per license. Maybe that's a cap, but I'm not necessarily in favor of a cap. So I think we should direct staff not to Hannah's overall what she did for the STRs, but just to see what our fellow commissioners or council member in other communities are doing. I would like to know, just to see what's going on, because it was in the paper, and I forget the numbers. They do generate a certain tax base. Without it, would we be hurting more? Probably. Is it worth having 1 or 2 more stores to increase sales tax? Maybe. All these questions would be nice to have answered, for me at least. And plus, I'm all for free market and enterprise and have your business. Everybody should get a shot at it. So just to come in here and shut it down by increasing buffers or caps, I'm not there yet. I would like to know more.
Mr. Chairman, Marco, I agree. I don't want to make an excessive amount of work for us or staff. I think the comparison, what are surrounding communities or tourist-based communities, comparable communities doing, is very helpful. But that's about the extent of the work I would do at this point.
Oh, absolutely.
And that may show us some other options, like you said, and then get a joint workshop and have council explicitly say, yes, we want X number, or we want a cap, and then we can complete the homework without creating a ton of it now. Yeah,
we can do that, or we can actually spend another hour on it and hash something out to present to them and say, hey, we looked at this. We looked at all angles over town. And we think that maybe if we increase this buffer here for the schools only, we'll come up with that. We don't necessarily approve a cap. Maybe we'll leave the buffers. I think we should look at it instead of just saying, hey, council, what do you really want? You want to stop right now? We'll increase the buffers. I don't think that doesn't feel like I did my job. I feel like we need to spend a little more time to figure this out. Maybe a little, I know it may go into micro managing and looking at things, but I think it might be worth it. That's just me. So in the meantime, I got Ingrid who would like to say something, and George. So we'll start with Ingrid, please.
And truthfully, it's more of a recap of what you're all kind of saying, and that is that I don't think we should make this decision lightly nor quickly. I think that taking a little bit of time, to Jen's point, it may take a little time. I think we owe it to the diverse group of people, both the businesses who may want to, do commerce here in this industry, as well as the people in the community who've been a voice of dissent. And I think that we need to take all those voices into consideration, look at what the options are, and try to make recommendations, because initially that's all this code is just the culmination of a dialogue that we thought at that time in history, this will probably work. And now, like I think Commissioner Grosscup said, we're certainly not at the infancy of this industry at this point. What have other communities learned, and how can we shape this in a way that when we move forward, we are doing it in a way that balances all those different voices? So I'm not in any hurry, but I do think it's a good dialogue to continue.
Completely agree. And I also, I'd like to fall back to Commissioner Shaver here about the philosophy of what are we trying to do with the schools? Are we trying to hide this stuff? Are we trying to disguise it? Are we trying to push it out of town so they're not near the schools? I think that's a fantastic question that George raised, is what's the philosophy to the schools, to the kids? I think that, to me, deserves a discussion between all of us. And speaking of that, George, please.
Well, I'm just, I was thinking that, just a cap number might make sense. It might be beneficial to people that are trying to come into town and open a dispensary. There's a fair amount of work that's done to just come to us. I think there can be a sort of a varying standard based on what the winds are, how the winds are blowing in the community, and which, vis-a-vis the last application, I think there might be times when that would have been accepted and times when it's not. And I think it's more fair to people that are getting into that business if we have our thoughts laid out well, and so, in a way that they can have a good expectation of what the outcome would be. The other thought is thinking about, we've looked at a map that relates to sort of Glenwood as it exists now, but I think we have to think about if there's future development in the south end of town, how our regulation relates to that potential development in the south. That's all I had to say.
That makes sense. Let me see. There was a comment. Was it Sumner that said? Sumner, what did you say? You said a lot. I'm looking for something specific, and I don't remember. I'll think about it.
I'm not sure what you're searching for, Marco.
Yeah, I know. Neither am I. It's been a long, relatively. Yeah. So anyway, any other discussion about this? I feel like Commissioner Grosscup, go please.
Yeah. So I think, along with just doing some simple, what are other groups, other communities doing, but do they have caps? I mean, I'm just curious. I remember with the site that's, I called it the Gas and Grass, but it's, there's a whole sign that's very prominent from I-70, and we had a lot of discussion about what that communicated as values. And I remember specifically you, Sumner, having some comments on that.
Yeah.
I think I was a little bit more concerned in that particular application, just with I think they were fewer than 40 feet from the middle school. So that, to me, it's hard to figure out the right answer, because I agree that this is an allowable business activity. I had heartburn over that site for just a variety of reasons. So I don't know how we could maybe think about it from that angle. There's just certain places that I don't necessarily want a marijuana business, and other places where I don't mind if they're more proximate. So I kind of am trying to say, maybe that overall cap works with some combo of it just doesn't, not in these few places. So that would be
make a marijuana mall, Catherine.
I didn't say that.
Like the auto mall that was supposed to come and never came.
I think CBD works for heartburn.
Yeah, right. Sumner.
Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
All right, I'm not disagreeing with you, Marco, or anybody on commission. Again, my concern is my own perceived relationship with council and where direction comes from. I would say, based on what we know so far from staff and Jen, I think the detailed record of these minutes posed as questions as well as potential solutions back to council with a workshop pending saying, hey, now council, you decide the extent of the limit you want, and we will help you figure it out, but we still need an additional direction based on this whole plethora of both solutions and questions we've come up with tonight. I think we've done the job.
What I agree, but I think to present them with something a little cleaner and maybe a little more detailed by looking at other communities and maybe working out some other things like special use transfer.
Yeah, well, I think those are all days tonight. We probably are going to ask staff to come up with a comparison and then ask council to set a workshop and to give us direction.
That's fine, but let's rehash this one more time at the next meeting and summarize and see if we can get them something that is a little more than just the minutes.
So are you saying have staff by the next meeting come up with a comparison report?
If that's any way possible, yes. And maybe summarize our comments and our, you know, our direction. I think there is some sort of a direction the whole commission went to, and I think if we come up with a summary, we can discuss it one more time, look at the comparison, and make a final, not draft, but make a final, hey, not recommendation, suggestion. This is what we think. And then have a work session, and then they can ask us question, why did you come up with that? Why did you come up with that? I don't know, just a little something a little more formal, I think.
Marco, this is Gretchen, if I may. I think it's possible to come up with a pretty simple comparison chart to see how we rate with other communities.
It is possible?
Oh yeah, I think so. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then how does the commission feel about that? Let's compile what we talked about tonight, summarize it, have staff write it up so we can, you know, look at it again, and look at the comparison maybe next month and see if we can come up with some sort of a suggestion before we have a joint workshop or whatever.
Now, is this something that we should continue and make a motion to continue, or how does that work?
Do we need to do that, Gretchen?
No, this is just a workshop, so we don't need any motions or anything.
Okay, so does anybody want to add something to our first iteration of this? It looks like Amber, please. You need to unmute.
I feel like I should always be on mute, so it's counterintuitive for me to take myself off. So I guess just a little bit of a procedural question. So we're going to direct staff to do a little more research and comparison. We will present that to council. We'll have a joint work session with council. And then at any point, I guess this is for staff or anyone who can answer, is there a point where the public is invited to know what's on the table? I know that they always are, like if they are watching the agendas, but is there a point where the public will be invited for more specific input in the process?
Well, this is going to turn into a public hearing, isn't it? Since we're changing the code potentially.
That's correct, Mark.
Decides to change the code. Yeah.
Yeah. So there will be public input on this. Absolutely. But
okay, well, I guess what I'm getting to the point is
not beforehand.
Okay, so it'll be us, council workshop, public hearing with us, where we'll hear the community's comments.
Yep.
And,
and possibly a revision on our end if we feel like the public has, a lot to say, or we move it on.
Thank you. That's all I was wanting to get clarification.
Thank you, Amber. Commissioner Kinkle, please.
I would just agree with a lot of the sentiments that it would be nice just to get information on what some of the other communities are doing. And yeah, I think from that we'll be able to gauge what would probably be best for Glenwood. And yeah, so that's where
Thank you. And Commissioner Zipperly.
Thanks. The only other thing I would like to maybe ask staff or city to do would be to find out if liquor stores are regulated similarly, if there's a cap or a proximity regulation for liquor stores just in our own city.
Okay, and add banks downtown as to that. Should banks downtown be regulated?
I mean, I think, Catherine, can you answer the question related? We don't have a requirement. I mean, other than they have to go through the, I forget the term of art, but the petition process for a liquor license.
The needs and desires, Jen, I think is what you're trying to get. Yeah, that is correct.
Carolyn, did that answer your question?
Can you say more? Sorry, Catherine Fletcher, can you say more about that? Because I'm not familiar with the term that you just used.
Oh, so
I mean, I am in general, but not just.
So when somebody applies for a liquor license, they'll complete an application, submit it. If it's a brand new license, they have to speak to all the neighboring businesses or residents and have them sign a petition to say they're in favor of this application for the liquor store or the liquor license. Does that help?
Like how far neighboring, like 200 feet, 900 feet?
There isn't actually any requirement, just as long as they're a citizen in the city of Glenwood Springs and they're over the age of 21 to sign the petition.
So they needn't even be an adjacent property?
No, it doesn't have to be.
And what about transfer? What about transfer, Catherine?
With a transfer, they do not have to do the needs and desires petition. It's not required. And it's a little faster process with the state as well. And they can actually get a temporary permit to conduct business when they take over the lease or the purchase until their full license is processed by the state. Mm-hmm.
So with this needs and desire petition, you can either propose or oppose. You can do either. Okay, but you just got to put down what you want, yay or nay.
And there is a public hearing also at the liquor hearing, and people are allowed to attend and voice their opinions or for or against also.
Is that for stores or for restaurants as well?
Just for everything.
For everything liquor?
Yes.
Okay. That's actually interesting to know. Thank you.
Unless it's a transfer, then there's not really the process.
Okay, excellent. That's very interesting. Okay, any other direction for staff to come up with for next month, I hope?
The only other, while doing that due diligence, Gretchen, it'd be interesting to find out if any other communities have rolled back the number of shops they've had. Not just the current criteria, but has anybody else rolled it back or since they started?
That might be a little harder to get to, but I'll see what I can find.
Maybe by word of mouth, whatever. Yeah.
Good add though, a good point, I think. Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll move on. Everybody okay with that? Nobody's shaking, so we're good. Okay, great. Let's go to our next discussion, which is adding design variance criteria to Title 070, Article 070, 060, 070, flexibility and relief procedures.
Okay, this is me. So in applying the variance criteria since the adoption of the new code, you all have expressed, at least in my opinion, expressed frustration in that there are not variance criteria that allow some flexibility, especially when you are considering deviations from the design standards. And so I'll just quickly summarize my report by saying that I've recommended kind of a two-pronged approach. The first one expands the existing alternative compliance equivalency to a couple different sections, specifically the landscaping and the parking area landscaping sections of the code. And that is in addition to where it's already allowed in the residential and non-residential sections of the design standards sections of the code. And then the second approach is actually adding design variance criteria, which cover all of the design standard sections of the code. So this is really intended also as a opening discussion to see how you all feel about the proposal of both expanding the alternative equivalent compliance section and then also adopting the three design variance criteria that I suggested on page 2 of my staff report. So with that, I just want to turn it over to you all for general discussion.
Okay, so let's see. Anybody want to talk? Raise your hand. I'm trying to just.
So, Marco, sorry, can I just add one other thing too? So in addition to this, I know that signs and sign criteria are also kind of a touchstone issue because we had, if you remember, I think it was a sign variance for Marshalls and then one for the lofts. And again, you all expressed a desire to have separate criteria that weren't the stringent or rigorous 7 criteria that we have in our code, because most sign variance requests really can't meet those 7 criteria. So in addition to this in the staff report, the design variance criteria, I do intend to bring forward some suggestions for additional variance criteria just for signs.
Okay, that would be in addition to what's here.
That's correct.
Okay, so, okay.
So, but right now, I think I'd just like you all to focus on the staff report and my suggestions for, or my recommendations for addressing design variance criteria.
Would you mind, and I see your red in the report as I read it again, and
right.
I'm trying to figure out how this would help.
Let me, should I share my screen so that we all can see the report?
Please.
Have it available. Okay, just a second.
Because I understand what we're trying to do, and I'm a huge proponent, and of looking at this, and I'm glad it is in front of us. But I want to understand where staff is coming from before I
sure
say some stuff.
Okay, that's fair. So right now we have this alternative equivalent compliance, which has these 4 criteria for you all to consider. And right now, this just lives in the residential and the non-residential sections of the code. And we have only applied this twice. One was a proposal to construct a single family home, which you all wouldn't see anyway. And they didn't actually comply with the letter of the code for the location of the garage. But we worked with them, and they offered some different designs that would achieve the intent of putting the garage behind the primary wall of the home. So
I'm sorry if I jump in, Gretchen.
yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
curious. So you went for the alternative equivalent compliance procedure or process for that specific application. If you wouldn't have done that, how many variances would have come forward?
It would have been, well, that particular example, they would have had to come to you for a variance from that design criteria. And there's no way that they could have met the hardship, especially the hardship.
The seven criteria.
That's correct, because they were constructing a brand new house. So how can you meet that hardship criteria? So, but they offered,
Okay,
sorry.
I'm all excited. So that said, did the alternative equivalent compliance create a better product for the city, obviously for the owner, as if they would have had to go through the criteria and not get what they wanted to build? Does this make any sense? This is
Well, so let me say that we felt that their proposed design revision offered the same or better design that would have been required by the code.
that would have required for with a variance or without?
I don't understand the question.
Yeah, I don't either. If so the design they came up with,
yes,
fit the code to 80%, 85%?
Well, no, it would, we felt that it was the same or better. So in other words, they proposed a garage that was basically flush with the wall of the primary wall of the house. And in the residential design section of the code, it specifically says the garage cannot be forward of the primary wall or flush with. It has to be behind the primary wall of the house. But what they did was they created a trellis structure, and they had a front porch on their house. And the combination of the two really we felt met the design intent of the code. So they applied for this alternative equivalent compliance. And it was a formal application where they had to give us a narrative and address each of these 4 standards. And we determined
the house forward, if you will, and then the garage was lined up with the trellis. Do you understand this correctly?
No, the garage was actually well behind the trellis.
Oh, but the trellis itself made it look like the garage sits back.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So the other time that we employed this alternative equivalent compliance was with the A&B Bank, if you remember. It had to do with the location of the, was it the front door?
It was the amount of glass.
Yeah,
So
that was right. That's right.
And I think Trent can probably, this is his application, so he could probably go through it a little bit better than I can. But essentially, hearing the comments of what the commissioners wanted. So this was a different kind of situation where we already had some feedback of what your feelings were related to the particular building. Felt like that the glass that they were proposing met with the vision of what that design would look like than a strict adherence to the code.
Yeah, because if you all remember the downtown, I'm just going to call them the downtown design standards, they have a heightened requirement for the amount of glazing on the first floor. And the bank was able to show us that that is a tremendous amount of glazing that's required, and that their design actually was well balanced, and the glazing we felt was plenty. So we incorporated this alternative equivalent compliance in the consideration that you all had, and you approved the design with this alternative.
So I'm just going to keep talking. Sorry, guys.
Please.
So what I'm understanding is that you're not going to try to make the variance criteria easier, but you're going to improve or change the, oh God,
No,
alternative equivalent compliance. You're going to add components to that would cover more of design standard, would cover
Okay.
more issues that people could go the other way.
so two things. One is expanding this alternative equivalent compliance, because this allows people to trade off. So maybe there's a design that achieves a similar or better design than the code requires. So it allows you all and staff to consider alternatives to the letter of the code. The other is a flat out variance. So somebody comes in and they say, I just absolutely don't want to comply with this design criteria, and I am not offering anything that might be determined as better. They just want a flat out way out of complying with that particular design criteria. So it's not, so with regard to the suggested variance criteria, it's not, you'll see that there's no hardship here. There's only 3 criteria right here on the screen, A, B, and C. And that's all it is.
Right. Now, can this come before the P&Z?
Yeah, the variance absolutely would.
No, the alternative equivalent.
The alternative equivalent would come before you in the normal application process. So, for example, you wouldn't see the residential one because that wouldn't come before you anyway. That's an administrative decision. A and B came before you, and it came before City Council.
Okay. And you just, okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm a little slow tonight, but you just said that if somebody does not want to
Right.
code at all, you said, I don't want to do this, but I don't want a variance. I want this equivalent thing. Get me that. Is that possible?
They're going to have to show how their design is the same or better than what's required by the code.
Okay, so that's the trade-off right there.
That's the trade-off. Yeah.
Okay, I'll shut up now. Sumner, please.
Well, no. So Marco, sorry, Sumner, just 1 second. So if, you know, the director, Jen, has to determine like if the alternative equivalent compliance, if it isn't the same or better than the code, then it would get kicked to you guys as a variance. You know, or they'll just appeal her decision.
Right.
To
I see the process now. I get it. Yeah. I see the process.
Marco, there was one other request, I think, or consideration, and we felt like it couldn't, like that an alternative could not meet what the code was asking for. That there wasn't a way to, it was related to an awning, this type of awning, and we felt like there wasn't, what they were asking, there wasn't a way to apply this. So that's the only other time. And, you know, I think they could have come forward with a variance, but it would not, under the, they wouldn't have been able to meet the test. So I think what Gretchen is talking about is expanding for just for the design piece, the ability for some of those other requests to use a different to use a different standard. Is that fair, Gretchen?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, and that makes complete sense on process here, totally. So Sumner, please.
With the intent, I believe that our goal is to reduce variances. Gretchen, help me understand the number 2, the new variance criteria, which would apply to design, and if I heard you right, some parking and some landscaping and maybe ultimately some signage. Would number 2 be the variance criteria we use, that it has to meet all 3 of these as opposed to the 7 that we tend to shudder from? Help explain the relationship between with number 2, please.
Okay, that's fair. So the 7 criteria that we have right now, these rigorous criteria, would apply to things, for example, like lot size variance requests, building height requests. So those are the zoning, the bulk standard requirements that live in the land use, the zoning section of the code. So that's where you really want the rigorous criteria. These number 2, A, B, and C, would apply to 070, 040, all of the development standards. So there are more flexible criteria that apply to the entire design section of the code. So for example, somebody busts their lighting, their maximum lighting on the site, they would be able to apply these more flexible criteria to that.
And then when we're considering this, we would then consider that we would have a finding that the proposal meets all 3 of these.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
But that is only if somebody's coming forward with the alternative equivalent compliance.
No,
No,
this
no.
is, yeah, this is separate. This is
My
separate.
understanding is the alternative equivalent compliance would almost bypass this. It'd be more, those would be more staff decisions. Is that correct?
No, not necessarily. So let's take the A and B example. They showed us that the glazing that they were required to have was really quite excessive, and they proposed a design that was, everybody felt was well balanced and a significant amount of glazing already, and that the code really didn't serve the design well. And so you all approved, you and city council approved the alternative.
And in the future, we would approve it based on these 3 criteria, or not at all?
No, you would still employ. Sorry, Sumner, I missed that.
Yeah. I mean, would number 2 not even apply in that case? We're just criteria, alternative equivalent compliance, that they're better or same or better. Yeah.
Number 2 would apply, say, if A and B came back with a facade that was had maybe 1 window on the ground floor or 2. I mean, it was, instead of 60%, it was 20%. And
not a reasonable.
we're saying no. I mean, this isn't even anything that achieves a similar intent of the code. So you need to apply for a variance.
So if I could just jump in, I think what we're saying is that we want to make both our alternative equivalent compliance maybe more useful and apply in a few different ways that it does not today, and then also change the design variance criteria to be just for design, not for the bulk and area requirements, also to not have the 7 standards. So it would have some people might go through the alternative equivalent compliance, some people might come through a variance. It sometimes might depend on how something was approved. So if it was a variance before, it probably needs to be, and they're changing it, but probably needs to be a variance again kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's great.
You guys have to stop confusing me. But
Sorry.
this is great. This is a step. I'm just gonna, sorry, I'm just blabbing, but I'm gonna listen a little longer and then I'll figure this out.
So again, just one last thing, and I'll pass none of this applies to actual land use. We're still back in our 7 rigorous criteria. Is that
Right.
general? Okay.
Yeah, that is correct. The bulk
Thank
and
you.
area requirements, as Jen said, really need to stick with those 7 rigorous criteria.
And why is that? Why can't we have a little bit of relief there as well?
No, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say we have there are some bulk and area requirement. Again, I will forget the exact term of art, but there is some flexibility there that's already built into the code, in general 15%. And so, I think if there's a real deviation from what is required in the code, they would need to go through that process, or potentially if it's really problematic, then the code is probably the problem and we should fix the code.
Or that they're not in an appropriate zone district and they need to request a rezoning. I mean, yeah, anyway.
Okay, Sumner, are you done?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Wusso, please.
So first and foremost, this is not new to our code. This has been kind of lingering back there and not been a vehicle in which we've used except for a handful of times.
The alternative compliance is in the code right now, but it only applies to the residential design requirements and then the non-residential design requirements. What I'm suggesting is that it also then be expanded to comply or to apply to the landscaping, screening, and fencing section of the code, and also the landscaping section of the parking code.
Sure. And I think that for so many of the applications we've seen, that would alleviate or give us a different vein to make a decision that we felt like it was appropriate, as a commission. My hesitation is if it takes all of us this long to wrap our mind around it, the applicants, it's a little confusing. And I think that, it definitely introduces a way to resolve the concern over the 7 criteria for variances, but I don't know that it's as clean and clear as it could be to just revise the variance language. So to me, the way that I understand it is that someone comes in as an applicant and it is at the discretion of the community development department that you guys decide whether or not you feel as though they are, should be introduced to this concept. And if so, it's a little muggy. Whereas just revising that variance language, I think, is a cleaner way to resolve the frustrations that we have come upon in the last 2 years since the code was implemented.
So if I could we're proposing both things here. We're not proposing one or the other.
Okay.
We're proposing both.
Okay, great. And if that's the case, then how do we, if we do code amendment below the variance language? Because so often, I understand that you guys are definitely the interpreters of the code when someone actually does the application. However, so often, we've got architects and contractors who are trying to understand the code from a distance and certainly not with the skill set of land use that you all have. And so with that in mind, I guess I would like to see some major revision of this section and making sure that they understand what their recourse is for variances, because I feel like that's been the challenge up to this point, is that people don't understand how they can get past the variances. And for the last 2 years, their go-to response was, it's really hard to get variance. And I appreciate so much that you guys have heard our feedback and are taking the time to try to resolve this. Like, no criticism of that. Like, it is so appreciated. But I'm just wanting to make sure that the way we go about it doesn't muddy it up even further than just creating a really clean change to the variance language.
So I think if I could just give an example. So generally what, and Gretchen and Trent jump in and tell me where I'm wrong here, but somebody says, well, I'm going to use an example of a parking lot. Hey, the code requires this very specific thing, but we want to try to do, we want to do this thing that's slightly different. And we say, well, you have to get a variance. If both of these are in the code, we can say, okay, here are the paths for what you're suggesting. Because I think that that's a lot of what happens is somebody says, like, the strict adherence to the code requires X, and we're trying to suggest Y. And I use the parking lot as an example. So the screening potentially of, and I would have to pull up the exact language, but there's a requirement for screening for headlights. And if somebody, I think it is a landscaping requirement, Gretchen, help me out here. But if somebody said, I would like to do it with a knee wall, we would say, I think you can't do that, but they could suggest that in this iteration and meet one of these tests.
And I do understand that, and I appreciate it. But I think what ends up so often in the application is that we have someone approach us, say it's an architect, and they have designed something, and they have two concerns that historically would have just prompted a variance request. Maybe they have a height requirement. They want to be 10 inches above where their height should be. And then they also have maybe a material concern or some more aesthetic variation. And so the challenge here that I see is that those two become two separate beasts, and we have to like take them this way and a little this way. And that's where I see the clarity and the cleanliness of just a revised variance language. And once again, I'm a planning and zoning commissioner. Land use is not my skill set. I'm just taking it based on experiences that we've all been going through when we see these applications. Because right now, we even within an application, we know the structure of a variance dialogue. And now, what does this look like if it comes to planning and zoning? Do we have, this expanding alternative equivalent compliance? How does that look as far as a planning and zoning recommendation? Do we have a dialogue similar to a variance? How does that look?
I think the one example that we have, that's how it, there was a separate action item that was related to that. And there was a conversation related to, and a staff recommendation related to that item.
Okay. I think what you're dealing with is someone who always looks at the 7 requirements and has a little objection because feels as though just language within the variance criteria could be amended to allow the flexibility within it versus needing another venue to resolve it. I think that's why I have any hesitation about this, and that's where my discussion comes from.
So could I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Are you suggesting that we leave the alternative equivalent compliance only to what applies to today and then adopting design variance criteria that's related to design? Because the alternative equivalent compliance it's still in the code.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess what I historically had always envisioned was that when it came to variances, we would have a very simple change that just said that like 6 out of 7 or 5 out of 7 criteria will be met. And I feel like, and I understand the necessity of each one of those, but usually it's one that has common sense. Now, hardship to me will be the one that everybody goes to. And I don't like the hardship concept because it has a lot of ambiguity to it. It's really easy to pull it out of pocket and be like, hardship, that's why we need this variance. But I do feel like it might be clean to just say, you know, the majority of these have been met, and there's this one criteria that is not, and there's a rational reason, and the commissioners all discuss it and feel comfortable allowing it or recommending the approval of it. That's really my 2 cents. And so I feel like I have definitely been heard now, which I appreciate everyone hearing. I've thrown that out there now so you all know where I'm coming from. This to me seems like this what we're looking at on the screen right now seems like a very convoluted way to get an approval on something when we could just very cleanly allow a variance. And that's just from my, once again, my kind of an outsider looking in on land use and how the code, you guys understand it to a depth and breadth that I don't understand it. But that's just kind of how I look at it.
Thank you, Ingrid. Can I throw a question in there quick? And just refresh my memory. Why did we go to 7 variance criteria for the new code? We had 5, right? The old one had 5, and you had to have 3 out of 5, 4. How did that go? And then
Marco, there was no clarification in the old code as to the number that you had to meet. It was really loosey-goosey.
So, okay, but why did we go to 7? What was
7 was what was recommended by Clarion based on work that they'd done all across the country. And I think that what we need to do is just do a little bit more research on this and provide you all with some additional information about why we staff feel that the 7 criteria still need to apply to the bulk and area requirements, because as Jen said, that if a particular development proposal isn't meeting the height of the zoning of the zone district or the lot size requirement, then there's a problem either with that development or with the underlying zoning standards. So
yes and no. I have to counter on that. I'd say yes and no, because sometimes 10 inches above, 8 inches above is perfectly acceptable in certain settings.
Right.
I think, but it makes it hard to get there with the 7 criteria. So I'm kind of banging the same drum Commissioner Wusso is banging, and you guys know that. I always said that I think a variance sometimes can improve a project.
So,
right.
Marco, in that example, you have to remember that there is some flexibility that's already built into the code, and Jen mentioned it earlier, is that we do have the ability to grant a 15% leeway in those bulk and area requirements.
I'm not understanding that.
Well, for example, a setback. Let's take a setback. And we actually had a project, again, it was a residential, is construction of a garage. They wanted to and needed to construct the garage within the required setback, but it was only a few inches in that setback. And based on where the garage was located and the location of the home, it had 0 impact on the neighbors. And so we considered a 15% deviation from the code requirement and allowed them to go forward with that garage construction.
And that was a zoning issue.
That was a zoning, it was a setback
So we have a 15%
leeway.
means
Yep.
leeway with zoning based on this from this. Now, how do you give a 15% leeway on hardship?
Well, they didn't have to meet that hardship criteria, I don't think.
But there's 7 criteria they have to meet. So
But it's not, it's an administrative adjustment. It's not a
Right.
variance, Marco.
Yeah.
And so the code was intended both to give flexibility, but then also to limit the number of variances. So it allowed things like the alternative equivalent compliance and the, I just said the term and now I can't, administrative adjustment.
Right.
But then also kind of strengthened the requirements for the variance.
Right, and I get that, and I'm sorry, I'm switching over to zoning, but the garage with the few inches, the 15% that you guys were able to do without triggering a variance, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
How would that work if somebody comes in with a financial hardship or another hardship that says, hey, I want my 15%, help me out?
Yeah, but 15% for what?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking. Is it really just on measurement, size?
So, okay, so what I need to do is provide you all with information about this administrative adjustment, because I'm looking at it right now on my paper copy of the code. So it applies to lot area, lot coverage, block length, setback, building height. Let's see, separation between buildings, and then it goes into parking and sign height and et cetera, et cetera. So
All dimension and size, really.
Yep.
Right.
Okay. Again, I'm going to listen a little longer. Commissioner Grosskopf.
Okay, I've been learning too, so kind of where I started with my questions shifted a little bit. Could you, Jen and Gretchen, talk about why is not just doing the expanding alternative equivalent compliance section to more areas outside of residential, non-residential? Why isn't that sufficient? What is it about? Because when I look at number 2 and then I look at the red, it's big. It now would apply to so many areas of the development standards. And so then if I were a developer, I would sort of think it almost, I guess I'm not fully, but it sort of feels like it slides backwards to the era of too many variances. And I think my memory is we had the strict 7 because the whole point was to almost make our code so wonderful that there would never be a need for a variance. And we've discovered that's not
true.
Okay. Right. And so, but I just wonder, like, if we do 1, does that open up enough of a flexibility where when it really does make sense, they could move forward? I think this is more, to me, it sort of works better on the staff side because you guys are working on it and thinking it through before it would kind of have to come and be a true variance where it can be voted down, or it just has more risk is the way I see it. So could you just talk about why both and why not 1 being sufficient?
I had considered that initially and thought about just expanding the alternative compliance. But then I thought about, okay, well, what if somebody isn't proposing a design that meets the code to the same or better degree? Say they just flat out don't want to comply with X design standard. What's the mechanism? And I thought that I had heard from you all, and I might be completely wrong, that you wanted some flexibility in the 7 criteria that we have to apply right now. some lesser criteria, if you will. So I suggested this kind of a two-pronged approach where we still have this alternative compliance and we apply it to more sections of the design section of the code. But then we also allow people the mechanism to just ask for a variance, and which would be a determination from you all based on these three short criteria.
So, because when I read the 3 in number 2 ABC here, and I was trying to find a way to see them on 2 screens where I could see the 7 versus these 3.
Mm-hmm.
I guess just at a, kind of my layman's vision, I was like, I would just do what I want and then argue under number 2 that somehow it represents an improvement. It just doesn't have the water or the weight that the 7. Now the 7 are uber strict. So I was yeah, you can go to the top. I was just trying to see them together because this really talks about hardship, not, created outside of your control. The other one allows you to create all sorts of requests within your control because you just don't feel like. So I just pointing that out at this.
No, I agree, because I went back and forth and I thought, well, maybe these are too loose, and and that's why we're having this discussion, because I need to gauge where you guys are at and how you want. Do you want to stick with these 7 rigorous criteria for design standards, or do you want some looser standards? And it doesn't have to be these 3. We could come up with, additional standards or additional criteria that are a little bit harder to meet for design variances.
Well, maybe that's what I'm sort of feeling, Gretchen, because it's like, if you offer the number 2 with those 3, there's just no point in the 7. It's kind of what I'm thinking, because anyone would just be able to come in and make an argument. Now, of course, we would have to hear it, or staff would. But the weight of these is significantly different. So it becomes much more of a how we see the overall package. And I guess maybe I'm misremembering, but I kind of felt like we leaned toward the whole, the code became much more descriptive with the Clarion work and all of that work. And some of that was to be more efficient, streamlined, speedier. Variances are slowing of a land use application. And so that was kind of how the 7, I mean, they're very strict, so I'm not in favor of no change. To me, if we were to do just what you have on the screen right now, to me, it feels a little bit too
loose.
I don't know what the word is, but it doesn't make any sense. Why did we live for 2 years with very, very strict ones, and we're trying to change it a little bit? This to me is a lot.
Okay.
So a couple of things quick while I'm thinking about it. Anna, are we tied to state statutes when it comes to variances?
Not that I'm aware of.
Since are we a charter? Is that what we're called?
Your home rule.
Home rule, so we can make our own rules.
Yep, unless there is a statute that has conflicting provisions on a matter that has been held to be of statewide concern as opposed to local concern. I'm not familiar of a statute that addresses variances, but I don't know. Gretchen, Jen, are you, do you know a law that addresses variances?
I'm not, Anna.
Okay.
I can always research it. It seems to me like it's a matter of local concern that you can regulate. But I mean, specifically, what are you worried about as far as the statewide regulation?
Oh, I'm just in general. I mean, if I don't know if there's a state statute that said, hey, if you guys building code wise, zoning code, you have to have the hardship in there, or you have to have does no harm, or any of these 7 points have to be in it.
Yeah, I think zoning and these kinds of issues are within a local jurisdiction's police power. So I think you do have a great deal of discretion.
Okay, thank you.
And Marco, I think with very similar to the prior discussion with the marijuana changes, I have gathered what other communities are doing as far as variances, and I just need to say that the 7 criteria, the rigorous criteria that we have in our code are really consistent with the communities that I've looked at so far. So what I will do before our next meeting is create a spreadsheet for you guys to take a look at what the criteria are for and what other communities are doing, especially when it comes to design variances from design standards.
I think that's a great reference, but I also, my opinion is that we don't necessarily have to.
Oh no.
What everybody else does, because
No. It's just
development wise, I would love to stick out and be able to do different things in this town than copy what everybody else is doing. So, but anyway, this is great. Now, the other part of my thing is, and Jen keeps repeating this, is in order to eliminate variances, we have to change the code. So, or adjust the code. So what are the main, where could we adjust? And I'm not just talking design, I'm talking zoning.
Yes. So Marco, I mean,
Yeah.
the example is if we keep seeing setback requests for setback variances, and then we really need to look at the code and see, okay, well, what's the problem with the code? And we did that with the adoption of the new code. There was some pretty stringent setback requirements in some of the residential zone districts where it didn't allow, for example, garages within 20 feet of the rear yard setback. And we thought, well, that's kind of silly. And we kept seeing that come up, and that might not be a good example, but we changed some of the setback requirements in the zoning districts based on that.
Well, that's a start, right? That's an absolute start. That's fantastic. Now, the other thing is, when we went through the code and we did the meetings and we did the back and forth, and the guys came up and, yes, this is beautiful, this is great, you're going to have so much flexibility. I have not seen an inch of flexibility with these 7 variance criteria, not a bit. So I'm very discouraged with this, and I think I said that from day one as we adopted this code. I don't see the flexibility I had hoped for, because a lot of time, and that's where the alternative compliant things comes in, you get a better product if you look at it from a different angle. And a lot of time, and our code won't allow that, and I struggle with that. I don't get the flexibility I was hoping for with this 7 variance thing, and that goes zoning or design. So anyway, that's just what I had to say. So Sumner, please.
Well, I'm not deviating that much, and I did some homework, and I would agree with Gretchen. When I started looking at variance criteria in other states and other areas, these 7 seem fairly consistent, even though it's almost easy to eliminate any variance. But when it comes to bulk and area, when it comes to the actual land use, I don't know that we stick with all 7 of these necessarily, but I do favor the stricter criteria when it comes to land use. And it seemed like I could glean the biggest thing I could glean is you grant a variance when it comes to land use when there's no reasonable use for the property by the property owner based on the land they own or have acquired in our code. So, and it doesn't mean they have to make a lot of money. It doesn't mean that we have to consider their financial hardship. So to some extent, those 7 criteria give us actually of some degree of flexibility. I'm not sure, we might not want to eliminate one of them or two. But again, back to what we're on tonight with design, and Marco, you're more sensitive to design than I am by far, but with design, I like the flexibility to do the alternative equivalent compliance, whether it be staff or us, because it does have same or better in it. And the same thing with the simple variance when it's design only. We're not talking about setbacks. We're not talking about sidewalks. We're talking about parking lot and landscape. I'm trying to think back to right now, the hospital is excavating that property they bought behind the bank. And I know, if I remember correctly, Gretchen, remind me, they had to apply for variances. It really from our parking code, I believe, from the landscaping code and swales, that ultimately we approved, but it didn't. I don't know that it took tons of deliberation and tons of criteria. Those are the kinds of things when it comes to design. And I think that simpler and flexible, more flexible is better, and tighter on land use itself. Again, I don't know the exact specifics I'd approve per se, but I think this direction is the right direction myself. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Sumner. Anybody else? Maybe, well, maybe Gretchen. I think I understand the process, but is there any way, and this is just for, simpler minded people like me, could you do some sort of a flow chart, how this process would work?
Sure.
Like applicant, and then should I go for variance? No. Can I go for this? Yes. But then what does apply? The 3 ABC if I do this, or do I go for the 1? You know what I mean? Just kind of give us a process.
Okay, I can do that. Sure.
Because I'm not.
May I, related to what you're saying right now, something that's helped me, and I think it's helped us in the past, is if Gretchen, if you could bring in somewhat fresh in the last 2 years, any not too complicated, but 1 or 2 simple applications and how they would apply under these rules versus what we had to go through. That's even, to me, many times more graphic than a flow chart alone. The 2 of them combined might help us understand the process.
Good
Okay,
idea.
yeah, I can do that.
Now, I'm going to throw that out there. I'd love to see that for zoning too, not just for design.
I think I froze up here, guys.
I'm sorry. I have to include the zoning in this because.
Damn, I'm frozen.
I just do.
Sumner, we can still hear you. Are you there?
No, he's in frozen eternity. So.
Shoot. Okay, but Marco, to answer your question, yes, I can bring examples, and then I will also address why staff is really recommending that those 7 criteria still apply to the bulk area requirements.
Right, and I'm going to try to figure out why they don't.
Okay, sounds good.
Which I won't, because I'm not, composed like you guys are. But I want flexibility, and I'm not seeing it. And having something trigger a variance that could be easily solved by something, maybe even more than 15% that you guys are allowed to give, but could be easily solved and help the development along in a better way. But then we look at these 7 criteria, we can't approve it because we don't see it in front of us. We're being hogtied by these 7 criteria, and I'm not liking it. I haven't liked it for the past 2 years.
All right, so yeah, I will bring back, I will show you the existing administrative adjustment, the 15%, and maybe that's another discussion, is to adjust the 15%.
And just because the code applies to 95% of our applications, that's great. but there's this small percentage that could really use a little help with a variance, but we can't grant it because we can't match all 7. But it would help the development, it would help town, it would help everybody in the long run. And that's where I'm stuck. So anyway, anybody else? Any direction? Obviously, we're gonna hopefully see this again next month or September or whenever.
No, probably August, I would think.
You got are you clear? Did we give you any direction, or was this terrible?
Yeah, no. I will do a lot more research and then bring back a bunch of more stuff for you guys to consider.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I'll get rid of that.
You're a little happy there. You're a little happy.
Damn.
Okay, so shall we conclude the discussion about the variances, or does anybody have anything to add? All right, thank you, Gretchen.
Sounds like ET phone home.
He did. His finger was glowing. Anyway, let's go to Jen, if we could, please. Any comments or updates for us? I think we're almost at the end, so.
I do think that Gretchen has we have an appeal of a decision that I made that we'd like to schedule a special meeting, and I'm going to let Gretchen say more.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there was an application that we received from somebody in the Meadows to open a retail marijuana establishment. And we did not proceed with the application because we had determined that the land use was not allowed in the Meadows based on how we have interpreted the annexation and development agreement over the past 10 plus years. So they have appealed the decision, the director's decision, or will be appealing. Their deadline is to do that tomorrow. And so I am going to send out a inquiry with you folks to see if we could hold a special meeting to hear that appeal within the next, probably be about mid-August. They've got to meet some noticing requirements, so it would look like mid-August.
Is the special meeting necessary because it's an appeal, or do we want to just help them out?
Well, I'll let Jen answer that. I'm less inclined to quote help them out, but she's being a whole lot more kind than I am. So.
I think that we have some other things that, for instance, we have lots of talk that we'd like to do about variances. And so was thinking that it would make sense to have this on a separate meeting. And if we're going to have a separate meeting, it makes sense for that to go first in terms of they are appealing decision that we made, and so would like to get them before you to hear your thoughts.
So are you saying we're going to do the appeal and then continue the workshops the same night?
No, I mean, I'm saying that we have our regular business for the regular night. So
we would do the appeal separately, just keep that separate.
Okay, is out of curiosity, what's the August agenda look like?
That's a good question.
I think you're likely to have a location and extent from city. And I think obviously if we're able to continue both of these work sessions, that discussion, and I feel like I'm missing something.
Yeah, no, me too.
Nothing to do with more residential unit in West Glenwood or anything like that?
No.
Good.
Nope. But anyway, yeah, it's more of a continuation of the same discussion tonight.
Okay. Okay, that sounds.
Can I just jump in a quick second, Marco? Since you brought up the West Glenwood residential thing, maybe Anna can help me out. I've been invited by obviously multiple people to engage in the conversation. Are we not doing that? Are we not allowed to? Does
So-
anyone get?
The annexation itself would be legislative. However, we do anticipate that those applications will come in concurrently with rezoning. And so I think it would be our recommendation that you hear all of that evidence and arguments and those sorts of things in the public hearing whenever that gets scheduled. Sorry, Anna, I don't know if you have something else.
No, it's fine. I wasn't immediately even sure what West Glenwood was referring to, but now I know.
Okay, so I think I'm clear. I should just stay clear of the whole thing until we're called upon. Yes,
Right.
Yes. Yes.
thanks all.
That brings another question to mind. In the paper, I saw that City Councilwoman Paula Stepp had commented on the council approval of the Rippey project. So now that that's all done, can we talk about that?
That's a good question, Carolyn. It's a really good question.
Like in what context or anywhere?
Well,
Social media or the newspaper or, just with citizens?
I mean, I personally don't see why not. I don't see any reason why not. It's already been a decision.
yeah, Carolyn, maybe I made a mistake. I didn't ask Anna, and I don't think on P&Z I want to use social media, and rarely would I ever want to use a paper. But I did write a letter to council since it was no longer a P&Z matter, advocating not opening the gate, even though we had passed in support of the Triumph proposal, but I advocated not opening the gate because it's not coming back to us. It was past us. I think and that was only to city council. It was not to the public. I don't think I stepped out of line there since it was biased. Did I, Anna?
No, and you've done that before, and I've said it was fine. You just want to make clear that any communications or statements you make are your own and not made on behalf of the commission. Or
Right, absolutely not. Right. Yeah.
I have a question about all that because I forget the attorney's name, Anna, who preceded you. Was it John? Okay.
Did he say something different?
I just couldn't. And I remember a big memo, and I would have to dig it up, that was written to us. I think he authored it or Carl authored it or something. And then we had even a session, a workshop, maybe it was. And my takeaway from that was I felt like he was almost saying to us, being on the commission, you're giving up a little bit of your ability to comment as a citizen. And I felt a little surprised about that memo, but he was very clear in his message.
Even after, I mean, are you sure it wasn't in advance of an application or in advance of a?
I think it was in advance, Catherine. It was anything prior to coming for us. Yeah.
I think I asked specifically because I said, even after it finishes us at P&Z, what if we want to step forward at council and make a comment as a citizen? And his response was that it was not advised, or I remember feeling like, wow, that's really surprising to hear that. So that is a memory I have, and this feels different. And
well, you want to wait until the deadline to file a 106 appeal expires.
Can I jump in with just one point here, is that so technically City Council could have remanded that application back to the Planning and Zoning Commission for whatever reason. So I thought that at least until the process is over, it's probably not a good idea to comment. That's just
no, absolutely, absolutely. I'm assuming you guys are all asking after there is a final decision by council and the appeal has expired, then can you comment it just solely in your own capacity as a citizen and not on
That's not what happened though. He commented before it went to city.
I commented before, but not contrary to the P and Z decision, just advocating like council deliberated, separating the gate issue from the approval. Maybe it was a bit of a gray step over, but it didn't undermine our decision at all, but maybe I should have held it. Yeah.
I think there's also a difference between maybe explaining some of your recommendations that you made at planning and zoning in a letter to council, which is kind of part of the record for them, as opposed to just making comments in public. That's not part of the public process.
Yeah.
And I too remember, like Catherine's memory is that John told us specifically that during an open application that we were not to make any public comments or have public dialogue with anyone regarding an open application.
Right, but I think Catherine was
I
saying
agree.
It's closed, after it's done.
Yeah, so but I agree with Sumner that if you're writing a letter that goes to council and you identify yourself as very much your message is coming from a member of the community and not a member of commission, that would be
Well,
okay.
I wouldn't comment to the public about it at all.
Yeah. That's what you have. I think, Anna, you've even said that in past as well.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Sumner has done that before, and he's asked if it was okay, and I said that it was okay, I guess. But I think the question initially was from Carolyn, was whether you can talk to people about Bell Rippey. I mean, you know, from my view as an attorney, be careful what you say and who you say it to always, regardless. But I don't think there's anything prohibits you if, like Ingrid said, the application is done, the appeal is done. It's not anything that's privileged. I don't know, but I can also see if I can pull up that memo and maybe I'm missing something. I have a feeling there was a specific issue that prompted him to write it, as there typically is. And so I'm not sure what that was.
How do we know if there's been an appeal to that decision?
Well, it'd have to be filed within 28 days if it's a 106 appeal. So I would wait, but arguably they got what they wanted, but
They got everything they wanted, yeah.
but a citizen, you know, a neighboring property owner could appeal it.
They can.
Well,
And would that appeal come back to us or to council?
it would go to the court.
Oh.
Go to the
okay.
district court.
Wow.
I am not aware of any law. It would be in effect a lawsuit. I mean, I'm not aware of any lawsuit that's been filed, but I don't know if 28 days have passed. I don't think so.
Right, so the decision was just last Thursday, and then it was yesterday or today that I saw Councilwoman Stepp have an editorial, and I just basically commented on that. So if there is an appeal, then I'm just in the same boat as her, and we've kind of commented to her.
You know, one thing, and maybe it's a gray zone, Anna and Carolyn, I read Paula's editorial, and again, if I read it correctly, and it was somewhat similar to what I wrote to council, not to the paper, mind you, it was not contrary to P&Z decision nor council decision. It just emphasized that the decision was made to leave Blake open to discussion. And I don't know that I was surprised to see it as an opinion, but I don't know that she undermined or prejudiced anything by that. I don't know, because it was consistent with the council decision. Even though she voted no, she said, I voted no because this is still an open-ended issue, and according to the city, it is. So I don't know. You know, I don't know the legality, but it didn't seem to be a contrary to council type of thing that any applicant could use in an appeal or anything like that.
Well, and I'm certainly not saying that every statement that would be made, you know, is forbidden. I'm just saying, just in case, it may be just a good practice to maybe not say anything. But I haven't seen what she said. I'm not saying whether or not, I'm sure it was fine.
Well, I think related to what Amber said, before the fact is more dangerous maybe than after the fact. Amber, I was approached weeks ago about West Glenwood. And I said a very terse sentence back, this is likely to come to P&Z. There is nothing I can comment on at this point. Because it's coming our way ahead of the fact is worse. And I think Carolyn learned a lesson earlier by inadvertently signing a petition. So I think we have to be way more afraid before the fact and maybe a little fearful after the fact.
Absolutely, because your decision hasn't been made, and the decision has to be made in a certain, in a certain process. But after it's been made, then there's less of, the process has been completed, and then now you're more free to speak.
One thing that I would suggest is if you have people who approach you, a good thing to say is if you are interested, we would love to hear your comments at the hearing when everybody who's making that decision can hear them all at once. So I think, and if people can't, which I understand, it's not always convenient for people to attend meetings, that then they could maybe write a letter. So yeah.
I feel really clear about all that, but I think I'm not clear yet about once it finishes with a vote from the commission and we're recommending, and we have some very significant things that have happened and are coming forward, as we all know. What is the advice in that interim, Anna, between us and a vote and then moving on to the final with council?
Well, I think Gretchen's example is a good one, where you could be remanded to you, and then would you not be able to make it to sit? Yeah.
So even making non-public, so i.e., I don't know how, Sumner, you did it, but if you could just email the chair or, the mayor, I suppose, and say, this is a personal comment. I mean, that would not come into the public sphere.
It would, because
they may make those letters public record though at the meeting. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
Guys, when in doubt, just zip it. Very simple. I hate to lose any of you over any of this. You will get a chance at the public hearing. You will. I'm serious. I've been doing this for a while, and Carl yelled at me numerous times. When in doubt, don't say anything.
I've been asked, I live in West Glenwood, so I've been asked to join every single thing. And I say instead, as a member of the Planning and Zoning Commissioner and a community member here in West Glenwood, you want my voice on there, so you don't want to talk to me about this at all. Because otherwise I'll have to recuse myself from the conversation. And then they go, okay. And then we're done and we move on.
And I've been approached during the first public meeting that they held as it was going on. And I'm like, nope, nothing from me, not doing it. So anyway, Amber.
So just as a point of clarification, because we are accepting public input, but we only accept it in a formal capacity, or are we allowed to accept it as community members at large? Like, I don't know how to say that other than that. Like, if you're out there and people are talking to you, am I allowed to accept that as, I mean, obviously you do, because that's just human nature, but are we allowed to accept that as input, or are we only allowed to accept what's in the application publicly submitted as input?
At the public hearing.
Okay.
Only.
Just walk away rudely. Say, I'm not listening. I gotta go.
Yeah.
It's an ex parte communication. So, that's the kind of thing that you're not supposed to consider outside of the public hearing, because everybody's supposed to have an opportunity to hear that, comment on it.
So what I would say to that, let's say a person who talks to me at a restaurant, I would say, hey, blah, blah, happy to hear that from you. You should submit that to Gretchen. Like, who, where, I don't know, like, where does that, who did,
there will be a public hearing at some point, Amber, and that's when they'll have their opportunity.
I know, but they get weary of looking for the public. They get weary of looking for the where it's on the agenda. I'm not trying to be the devil's advocate here, but I found myself in this position. they get weary of looking for where the item's coming up. They just want somewhere to put their voice.
Go to the website and check the agenda.
Well,
But if
that's
people have comments
Yeah.
now, we could accept them if you want to send them to Gretchen or to me. It would be good if there was something that caught our attention so we know to pull that in. But it is difficult at this point where you have people who might be responding to something that's speculative. We don't have an application.
So for example, if you have a ranting anti-marijuana member of the public, I could say, please send an email to Gretchen or Jen, top subject, future marijuana stores, and then that will be somehow stored somewhere where it will come up again. I'm just looking for an outlet. You hear what I'm saying?
My
So
way.
No,
is this the appropriate chain of command?
Yes. Yeah, have
Okay.
have them send the comments, and then we'll file them, and I keep a file of all this stuff too, because I've been getting comments from people about the West Glenwood proposed development, and I make a point to say that we don't have an application yet, but I'll keep your comments on file.
There you have it. Listen to the
Thank
professor.
you. As a girl on the street, I just want to know where a place that this lands. So that's it.
Okay, excellent. Now we had a little training session past the workshop.
Well,
Fantastic.
if we could continue the training session, maybe as it related to the last city council meeting, it was brought up that I had recused myself on the riparian setback, and there was pressure put on one of the city council members that also lives on a live water situation in Glenwood Springs, and for him to recuse himself as well from that discussion. And it was determined by Carl that he did not have to recuse himself. So I explained via email to all the city council people that I was told that I had to do that because I was noticed. I'm questioning now whether that was accurate. According to Carl, one of the primary considerations that this counselor person had to make was whether he could fairly represent himself to that decision. And I'm questioning whether I should have recused myself out of, just clear cut, you have to do this sort of thing. After hearing what Carl said to the council member. And I think the standard was that I was noticed, so that therefore I had to, but I'm wondering if that is correct or not. And then the next step is, how can I communicate my thoughts to the council when it becomes the riparian setback scenario comes before them?
I think the latter question is easier. I like Sumner did. I think you can just send them an email. You can direct it to Jonathan, and then
I would send it to Trent.
Oh, yeah.
So that he can make sure it gets into the packet. And I think the difference is whether it's legislative.
So I can't present myself in person?
Sure, you can.
Oh, sure.
So either way, it can be communicated email or letter or by voice.
Especially since you were recused yourself, you can show up in front of the meeting.
Should I have been recused? Should I have recused myself and required to be recused?
That I don't know.
Well, like
George, it might be, what was the rationale for Steve not having to recuse himself?
Well, Carl explained the whole thing in detail. But and I don't know, he had several points, and which I unfortunately can't recount all of those. I don't know, Carolyn, you seem to be indicating that you had heard that. I don't know if you can elaborate or not, but there, according to Carl and his interpretation on several counts of the way the law is written, Steve did not need to do that unless he felt that he should himself. It was put on Steve's shoulder whether he would do that or not. But you're muted. There you go.
You didn't feel like you had that option.
From my recollection, I was told that since I was noticed, I had to recuse myself.
That's my recollection too, especially when that developer across the street wanted to put a fourplex.
But I think that the difference is it's a land, I think somewhat the difference may be land use versus the legislative piece. How about we can circle back to that and get a more precise answer, but that it is a difference of standards likely related to a land use application versus a legislative action where it applies to everyone in the community.
And the land use is quasi judicial, so there's maybe a higher standard of conflict of interest.
Yeah, I'd welcome some clarification on it.
To all of us, particularly in
I would too, because I had a particular thing happen in my neighborhood, and I was like, because you were on the commission and then you were also noticed, you couldn't do it. I couldn't comment at all. So
But that was a quasi judicial proceeding, right? That was on a land use application?
mm-hmm.
those apartments.
And that was yes. Well, yes.
Yeah. And these were proposed changes to the development code.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is, I think, a significant distinction, whether or not, what the conflict of interest standard is for a legislative. I mean, I'll talk to Carl. He obviously did the analysis. Yeah.
Okay, we'll circle back. Sounds good.
Well, just as a point of clarification, though, is I had two in this particular application, and I would hate for it coming forward if we have any South Glenwood development. Is I was in conflict, so I had to recuse myself. Jonathan also had the lawyer, and so essentially, no one from South Glenwood had any representation in that decision about what was being built, because between myself and Jonathan having to recuse themselves over two different potential subjects, that ends up I'm just saying that feels wonky. Like if you're not able to be represented by your representative because of, I think it was, I don't know the terms, but do you see what I'm saying? It feels like I couldn't even, we had no recourse. I had my HOA behind me. We were trying to figure out how to do it. We weren't trying to fight exactly. We were trying to figure out a way path forward, but then our city council representative couldn't help us. Then we're just fucked.
Well, you could come and speak at the hearing.
Well, I did. And I said, well, no, I was told I couldn't speak at the hearing because I couldn't like make faces or wink or like do any thumbs up to anyone. So I did send a letter, but we were coming representatives for your HOA.
Well, I think
So
that was
just-
what Steve,
just a point of
one of Steve's
clarification.
one of Steve's comments was that, I represent people all along that side of the Roaring Fork River. And, I feel responsible as their representative to speak on that particular subject, meaning the riparian setback issue.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I felt like and what people felt like. And I think going forward, we're only building in South Glenwood. And I feel like it should be, well, anyway, I'm sure someone's got.
Yeah, I think in both cases, it seems to fly in the face of representative government if the representative can't represent his district, the people of his district.
Yeah.
But, law and practicality maybe don't always jive.
Huh.
Well, George, you should have every right, as much as Steve did, to input on the riparian guidelines. So I'm curious to see how this plays out.
Yeah, me too.
Bring it back to us.
Let's circle back. That sounds great. So I think we've said enough. Any other comments from the commissioners?
I'll just plug again, housing and zoning, we need a workshop
I agree.
badly, very badly.
2 workshops is not enough?
What?
Now we need more. Housing and zoning. Sounds good. Affordable housing, right, Sumner?
We've been postponing this one, and the Housing Commission is on the cusp of, we need more.
Right. Amber?
Anyway,
Wanted to
that's
give-
all.
Oh, I just want to give a compliment to the staff because what we are so fortunate to have such creative, smart, capable people helping us navigate this. And so obviously I'm new to it also, but I just want to express that sentiment that I feel so grateful to have such people at our helm.
Here, here.
Excellent. Any other comments?
I'm just going to follow up and just say thank you to staff for hearing us with the variances and the marijuana amendment. Just taking our feedback and creating a plan that allowed us to have the dialogue in the workshop. So thank you for that. Whatever the end result may be. We appreciate the time and energy invested.
I concur. I was going to say something, now I totally forgot. But anyway, if we're all good for tonight. Oh, I like that we have workshops when the agenda is light. Let's keep doing that if there's other things we need to cover. I'd love to keep going. I thought that was great. And it's really only 3 to 9, so all good. We did what we could. Good night, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Right.